Thanks, everyone. So we're here today to talk about the developer experience for Corda. This is an area that us, as in Web3 Labs, have been thinking about a lot. And we hope that what you're going to see today can start framing in your mind where you can actually go around the developer experience for Corda. So a little bit just about Web3 Labs. We're a London-based technology company. We've got two main product focuses. One of them is the Epirus Blockchain Explorer and Smart Contract Registry, which is a sort of operations environment for managing and viewing blockchain data and assets that they have on blockchain. We see that it's very important for organizations to have value on top of their blockchain deployments rather than just generic block explorers. And the other is the Web3j group of projects, which are for JVM developers, so Java, Android, Kotlin, for integrating with a number of leading blockchain technologies. I'm going to start off by just talking a little bit about Web3j, just because this is really where we started on our journey originally with blockchain back in 2016. And so what it provides is a very straightforward Java-based environment for integrating with a number of leading blockchains. It does things like the account and transaction management, creates nice abstractions for it just to simplify what developers need to do. It takes advantage of the type safety features of the actual JVM so that you get you get the type safety guarantees when you're going from like a JVM environment to an actual smart contract on a blockchain. And then works nicely with the major build tools, Maven and Gradle for those people on the JVM. Historically, we've integrated with Ethereum-based blockchains, and so, of course, Ethereum, then Hyperledger Besu, the Aeon network, and Quorum. And the actual library itself, is 3 years old. It's got a decent amount of traction, we feel, for for an open source project. There's over 100 contributors to the project. We've had over 400K downloads of the core artifacts. If you look at everything, that number's a lot larger, and over 2,500 GitHub stars. But the reason we're here today, of course, is to talk about Web3j and Corda. So we wanted to take what we've done with the world of Ethereum-based blockchains and apply that thinking to Corda, and so that we could provide a much simpler integration experience for developers working with CorDapps. And building on top of this recently announced Corda Open API connector, and then simplify some of the earlier on steps as well, because one of the challenges, and this is something that I think everyone's very much so the opinion of, when it comes to working with blockchain technology, there's those of us who probably are the majority are here who are already have that knowledge to work with it. But then if you think back to when you first started working with the technology, all the different things you had to learn about, whether or not you're talking about an Ethereum variant or you're talking about Corda, you're talking about Fabric, well, one of those, it's like there's all these new concepts where you've got the kind of distributed systems theory, the cryptography theory, then potentially just the conceptual ideas that come with it as well. So that's really what we're focused on, and we want to make it as simple as possible to bring new developers onto these platforms as well, which is really where we feel we can succeed with this. The other thing, of course, is providing some powerful integration testing capabilities as well, which we'll be talking about shortly. So right now, if you're working with Corda, the developer kind of workflow looks something like this, where you have to create a new JVM project. You need to add in your specific library dependencies that you have, create some contracts and workflows, create a client for integrating with that CorDapp. Then you actually need to start up a network to deploy it, run, and of course, finally, just really pray that everything does actually come together, because with all of these different steps, there's things that can go wrong, and you really end up going down a rabbit hole just to perform the basic things. So we've been thinking a lot about how we can simplify this process, and Panitha is going to talk about that.
As we've seen, we've all experienced that initial steps to get along and start working with a new technology is the most challenging part. So we've come with something as simple as 3 commands to get you going with starting up a CorDapp and starting and, let's say, even executing and working with an integration test. The first thing, like in any other tool, is get the executable. So this command here will download the executable for you, downloads the Web3j Corda, and you can start working with it immediately. This even adds it to the path, so the next time you open the terminal, it says Web3j-Corda is all that you need to run to generate whatever you require. So the first thing that we can do, we have two main things, functionalities of Web3j Corda. One is we create a new project. So this creates a template project from scratch. It adds all the necessary flows and contracts and the dependencies that are needed to build all the CorDapp dependencies, as well as has some client wrappers already pre-generated. So these client wrappers use the OpenAPI connector to speak and connect with the existing Corda network. We also have network DSL, which starts up a network in a Dockerized container, which is all enabled in the Web3j Corda. Let's say we already have a CorDapp, and we are just interested in writing clients for it. We have the Web3j Corda generate, which can help us just write the client wrappers to existing CorDapps. So what this does is it reads through all your CorDapps, it reads every flow and contracts in the existing CorDapp, and generates the necessary client wrappers such that we can start communicating with it easily. So to start and deploy the network, it would just be a simple Gradle command as Gradle test, because this would start up a network as well as invoke flows. Everything everything generated, everything is auto-generated in there. Let's see a small demo on how this whole thing works. Here we have a Web3j instance which we have already installed. So we start the new command with the output directory being mentioned as where we want the template to be generated, what's the name that we would like, and as well as the package that we want the template to be generated. It's generated in a particular folder, which is easily locatable, which is actually the input folder that we've mentioned. So this starts up and loads the whole, it creates the CorDapp and as well as the client directory. So here we have the workflows that are generated, all the flows, which is just a template flow. It does nothing, there's no logic in it, but it has everything in place for you to get going and write the core logic. We also have some clients which are generated with using these particular flows. So this has all the flow, information that was in the flow in the client wrappers. So let's say we want to edit it and just add some simple logic, which takes in a constructor, which takes in a string, and then we're just going to return a string from here, just saying that, OK, fine, we have invoked it from the flow. So this flow will eventually, at the end of it, actually call back this flow and see that we are invoking the flow using the wrappers that are generated. So once this flow is generated, once we have edited it, added all the logic that we need, we can regenerate the client wrappers, and everything gets auto-refreshed into what our clients were. So we don't have to go back and edit the clients, or we don't have to make sure that what if the client is not synced with the CorDapp, or we don't have to do anything like that. So we have these tasks which regenerates all the flows and all the client wrappers necessary and updates if we have, let's say, any input which changes, which is the different constructor. Everything gets regenerated and updated in the client wrappers. So with this, once all of them are generated, we can see the change and also start up the network. We now have, we've regenerated all of them, and now it takes in a payload and returns the string, unlike what was previously generated. Now we can use these interfaces and invoke the flow. We also auto-generate some tests, which are all stubbed for now because it depends on what we want the input to be. So let's just add some test which can take in some input and verify and run the logic. So we have some sample input, that's just Corda, and then our flow, as we've seen in the flow test there, takes in the payload, which is the initiator payload, which is an input of string. And the output that we get is actually a string. So we just verify that what we've passed in and what we expect is the same. This just tries to verify that we're actually calling the flow instead of some pre-generated code. Once we have this, we want to initialize the network. The network here is actually a DSL. So we have defined a DSL which can help us work and create simple networks as and when we need. So we have the base directory, which is where our CorDapps are actually located. So if you want to work with a client which is not in the path of the CorDapps, we can just redirect it to this base directory. It has all the information, and it links to the CorDapps that are there. And then we can specify all the nodes that we want to define. So the nodes here can be either parties or node trees. We have a lot of sensible defaults, such as the port numbers, RPC port numbers, and things like that, which we don't have to worry about. And all these get auto-filled in if we don't mention. If you would like to mention all of them, there is a capability to use all that. Here we just start one party, because we are not really, our CorDapp doesn't do much to start up multiple parties or doesn't have a verification. So here we start up one party, and we try and run the integration test. So at the background, what this network DSL is actually doing is, it starts up a complete Docker container network system, one Docker container for each node that we have mentioned in here. So for every node, it starts a Docker container, and also starts up a network map service, which links and communicates with all the nodes. So if we have node trees, those are also started up as a Docker node. And eventually, once the Docker starts, this uses something called test containers, which can run Dockers on your test network. We don't use any node drivers or driver DSLs. Instead, we have the complete, we use the Corda Zulu 4.1 image. So it's actually as good as running a Corda network afresh. So if you had to test your CorDapp, it would give you the functionality of what would actually happen if you were trying to run in an actual working system. So this takes some time because the Corda starts up on a Docker network, but eventually once it verifies with the network map services and actually is able to manage and get the right certificates, we have the whole thing up and running. And it also uses the Open API connector in the background. So here we have just a grid tick that just shows that we actually invoke the flow, and what we got out of this is what we were expecting. So what did we do in here? We have a lot of things going in the background. So all of the details are kind of abstracted out such that these need not be known to the end user, and once you just start, you don't need to know every single detail to actually get going and write this test. So one is having an Corda instance. So here we have, since we're using the Open API connector, we have the URL, which is mentioned, and since we start the network, we have it all in the information, and we just start using and build a Corda instance. Once this instance is created, like let's say if you had a Corda network running at your cloud, you can just take that URL and build an instance of Corda. We can perform various network queries with it, such as once we have the instance, we can probably query all the existing nodes, or we can query by their respective X500 names, or let's say host and port. We also have the querying capabilities of node trees, whether which node tree exists, what's not there. Now the querying of nodes we have these party information, and let's say we want to start a flow. It's just this one line of code which starts the flow. We have already the wrappers initialized. So this talks about an example of the obligation CorDapp. So we have generated the obligation CorDapp. We have generated all the necessary wrappers, and we've also initialized the Corda service. So in here, we load that particular generated wrapper with the given Corda service, and then we can query all the flows. So from the given flows, we just are currently interested only in the issue obligator flow. So in the issue obligator flow, we try and start the flow, and this is all we need to actually invoke the flow. Everything in here is type safe, so if anywhere you weren't passing the correct path, or if you are not aware of what is the inputs for this particular flow, everything is auto-generated, so we can just easily verify the whole thing. Issue obligation flow returns a signed transaction, which once the whole thing is executed, gives us a signed transaction. So you can start a flow and start working with it with as simple as this one line of code. So what did we do in here? Our Web3j new and generate kind of does everything from start to end of whatever is necessary. It creates the npm project, gets all the Web3j Corda dependencies, also creates the contracts workflows, and most importantly, generates the clients necessary to working and get going with it. We also have the ability to start up the whole network. We have the ability to start a network of any number of nodes, node trees, or whichever is convenient, and then we can just start running and executing flows. So what about next? We have quite a bit of things in pipeline. One is currently we just generate the Kotlin code. We are planning on generating the Java code, and also having vault query support. We are planning on having support for vault queries, as well as if we had given a particular state, the ability to track that particular vault, the state of the vault. We also are planning to have some progress trackers, because now once the flow goes in, it's a synchronous process which waits till we get a signed transaction. So if we have progress trackers which can hook onto that particular progress and see which part of the flow we are in, that would be very helpful. Also, we have plans to have client wrappers which can upgrade the existing CorDapps. This would enable, like, if we want to start up the whole new network again, we have to bring the whole network down and start the whole thing with new CorDapp jars. So this will enable easier upgradation.
So that's what we wanted to share with you all today, just on Web3j Corda. It's just been released today, so we really want to get people to start using it and to actually start feeding back in any way to the actual team here. So of course, via GitHub, you can raise issues, or if you go to the Web3 Labs website, you'll see that there's contact details there. But fundamentally, it's about having these very simple steps. So Corda does a lot behind the scenes, and the applications, because of the all of its capabilities, there's a lot of kind of plumbing, and so we really want to, like I said, emphasize that it can be simplified a lot, and there's a lot of this stuff that people shouldn't have to think about when they first get started anyway. So this is the initial release, and so you head to. If you go to corda.web3j.io, you'll see the documentation, and you'll also see the instructions there for installing it. And for those of you who want to keep it really simple, just go to web3j.io, and that'll take you to where you need to go. Thank you, everyone, and I think we've got time for questions now.
Yeah, I think simplifying deploying of Corda, testing of Corda, or CorDapps rather, is one of the biggest things right now, just making it a lot easier. So we haven't got too many questions, but there is one here about mixed networks and mixed nodes. So for example, testing against a 4.1 node versus a 3.3 node, for example. Are you able to kind of configure the nodes to be different at the moment?
We currently don't have the capability, but we could as well. I mean, it's just, since we are using the image of Corda 4.1, we could have the ability to change the images and deploy whichever image would be necessary. But that's not in there now.
Okay, cool. So are you able to select the type of image you want? So for example,
no.
So at the moment,
at this point of time,
it's
no.
just leveled at 4.1.
Yeah.
And again, it kind of ties in with the philosophy of trying to enforce sensible defaults, rather than give people too many things that they need to think about at the beginning. Just have something that will get them up and running quickly.
Okay, awesome. So I think that's really it for now. But yeah, thanks very much. I think a round of applause for Punitha and